Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the HR and payroll mistakes that are commonly overlooked by CFOs, especially when strategizing around growth. We've had a lot of interest in this topic today, and we hope to share some insightful experience and learnings that can help you in terms of the growth. On the session today is myself, Sven Martin, and I'm one of the executive directors at Fusion 5. Been part of the business for a long time, seen our organizational grow, faced a lot of the challenges that we're probably all experiencing, and Fusion 5 is up to about 700 people now, so we've really had to double down on some of the initiatives that we're going to talk about on today. And joining me is Chris Radley. So Chris.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris. My focus is designing technology that tries to solve some of the problems that we'll talk through today. It's actually been closer to 20 years now. I was thinking about it this morning. Been focusing on payroll and HR projects across here, New Zealand, and in Australia as well. So hopefully we'll bring some good experience and insight to the session today.
Absolutely. And we're running a Q&A, which will endeavour to cover off as many questions as we can at the end. You can either email Chris, which is emails there, or just place them in the question chat on the GoToWebinar session, and we'll have a session at the end. So in terms of execs, one of the risks we see that businesses are faced in terms of meeting growth aspirations and alike are now pretty much sitting around people and skills. In terms of the war on talent going on, the skill shortages really restrict the ability for us to bring in new hires and skills that can actually enable our growth or support the growth that we're experiencing. The talent war is doing all kinds of things when it comes to either skill shortages, putting pressure on salaries, having our teams keeping retention, making retention more challenging, and that they're getting offers that are significantly higher than what they maybe are now. We're needing to match those, but also build more constructive, career pathways to retain people and keep them in our organization. As an exec, I think one of the things is now a new challenge for us is understanding where our skill gaps are and needing to build those skills that are critical to us meeting the ongoing demand or the demand that we're kind of generating. It's not as easy to just go and hire them as we could potentially in the past. And then from a financial aspect, absorbing, and I say retrofitting, but these increased costs need to go somewhere if we're going to maintain growth. And how do we actually build that into our service offerings? Because potentially you can't just put prices up as easily as you can to stay competitive. So that's another area that kind of drives different ways of thinking, more efficiency. How do we get to outcomes quicker, etc. And then I think one of the key things is really the inability to make strategic decisions regarding resourcing or to actually even forecast accurately due to just missing data when it comes to things around people and HR and payroll. So these are some of the key things we're experiencing and we hear a lot of. And I guess it's backed up by some of the research as well. So Chris, which Chris will take us through.
Yeah, so one thing we can share after the session today, and we really enjoy and read a lot from the Josh Bersin Institute. There's a lot of predictions and a lot around people and well-being and a lot of information out there, but we find that the stuff that comes from Josh Bersin is very pragmatic, albeit that it has a worldwide component to it. But obviously, as Sven says, the economy, regardless, is going to continue to grow and change. And different businesses will, depending on what they're doing strategy-wise, will obviously will be successful in that, be challenged by that. We're seeing more and more now in real terms, businesses looking at learning and skills, career development, where the business needs to go, where people want to go, and having those analytics and having that information is hugely important. Obviously, again, people working different locations, their well-being, gone are the days where with so many different generations now in the workforce, There's so many different ways and means to manage people, and focusing on their well-being and experience depending on who they are is hugely important. Again, rewarding people in different ways is more important, not necessarily just paying people more. And again, we're seeing a huge uptake in trying to get information around people to allow managers and staff and executives to sort of make really informed decisions. And we're seeing some really interesting metrics around actually if that's done really well, it enables businesses to be more profitable, more engaged, etc. So again, probably the last point there is just what we're seeing more and more is where organisations have invested in their ERP or CRM systems, those are always seen as hugely important. But now actually building out this sort of HR people payroll piece, we see as really advancing, not just through these predictions, but obviously through real life.
Thanks, Chris. And I guess in terms of putting the 5 mistakes that we observe together, it's a bit of a clash of two worlds, really. Chris's experience in HR and payroll, and mine coming from my role being, Chief Revenue Officer and focus on growth and business growth, and pulling those into how we feel we can really enable growth by solving these. So the first mistake we see is seeing HR and payroll as transactional and operational. It's a big shift at the moment in terms of elevating the value that payroll and HR is to organizations from that kind of operational sense.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a huge amount, as most of you will know, legacy thinking. We pay people fortnightly, monthly. We follow sort of certain parameters. It's very batch, it's very manual for a lot of organizations. And what we're seeing now is a real mindset shift where organizations are going, well, how do we make this better? Not just, how do we get rid of a spreadsheet, but how do we create something that's really going to add value to the organization, whether it be, again, some of those topics before around well-being, thinking of the whole organization, thinking of the employee's life cycle through the organization, and again, transforming that from a very sort of transactional multi-system or multi-pieces of technology to get a job done to actually, how do we see the whole sort of pattern? And we're seeing a lot of RFPs, a lot of queries now from the market where organizations, probably a little bit like what they're doing or have done around ERP and CRM, going, well, how do we do this much better, and how do we invest over the next 3, 5, 10 years into a much greater strategy than versus just plugging a gap with a particular point solution. So yeah, so I guess that again backed up through the Josh Burson company, again, many businesses. And it's not to say that everyone has to suddenly become hugely people-centric. Obviously, it's an evolving piece, and it's got to make sense to different businesses and different models, where companies have products that are under huge high demand. Sometimes the human-centered approach isn't so important. Obviously, if you're in a very competitive situation, the human-centered approach can make a huge difference. So again, we're seeing quite a change in the way that organizations are thinking. We're seeing a lot more CFOs and a lot more executives involved in the process around choosing products and services around how they achieve some of these objectives. But I guess the table there really sort of puts people at the center, and how do we make our people better to make the business more profitable? And obviously that's quite a change, because so many of us have to put up to boards and execs and recommendations that have to be very, very tangible, and the people piece sometimes isn't so easy to quantify, but we're definitely seeing a huge shift there.
And I think it's just one of the conversations we have a lot of internally too, that our practices are challenged by finding good people and skills. So that people first element is largely now driven by a necessity of the way the market is and needing to change to actually stay competitive and grow. So it's definitely changing the thinking. The second mistake we see is this perception of risk, that it's less risky sticking with the current payroll that I've got versus actually changing it. And we disagree with this, even though at the offset that may seem true. When you actually start unpacking it, it's potentially quite a different risk profile.
Yeah, and that probably again comes down to, I think, the average age that most organisations have used, call it a payroll system, is I think sort of circa 12, 13 years. So there's a lot of historical configurations, there's a lot of legislation that has changed over that time. Payroll's generally been somewhat of a black box, and what we're finding through that, and we've got sort of, one example there where organisations have just paid people a certain way for a long time. And again, that's industry dependent. But one organisation we found, was paying $3 million a year more in allowances and other bits and pieces that they shouldn't have been. So we've sort of found that unpacking payroll has really sort of challenged and provided some real benefit there, not just in process improvements, but in actual tangible dollars. Again, just because a lot of systems haven't been invested in, a lot of legacy changes have been, or a lot of changes have come through legislation, I should say, and most organisations have just seen it as a process around sort of, well, as long as we're paying people, we're okay. So we really see that, as Sven said, sort of the unpacking of that is hugely important. And again, it's sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But we see a real positive there when organisations do open that up.
Absolutely, and it's probably one of the most thorough auditing processes you can do in terms of mitigating any risk around potential pay. But I think that other comment Chris made around the fact that it allows you to reevaluate the business process at the core of people is actually the huge opportunity to move away from that traditional thinking of just being transactional. And
I think what happens is we all, the way payrolls are run is very 70s, 80s thinking. And I mean, that might sound like a sort of brash statement, but again, we report to the government, we report to the ATO in Australia, the IRD here, all to do with the way that they need their information. And as long as we're complying with that, well, we think that we're okay, but we don't necessarily delve into some of the improvements that can be made.
Correct. And as a result, they kind of keep us stuck in that traditional sense.
Mm.
The third mistake we see is accepting that traditional process, as Chris was saying, the 70s, 80s way of paying and procedures as best practice, be that across payroll and or HR. It's very unusual that we just don't see the potential of what change could make in this area when we've done that in so many other areas of the business.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, the batch payroll piece is sort of one piece, but getting real-time analytics around people. But we find the biggest restrictor to innovation is people's systems, the multiple systems that they have. And again, it's just always been done the way that it's done, whether that's a learning process, whether it be a performance process. And so many organisations just really haven't challenged that status quo. We're seeing a lot of demand now around, not just sort of people having payday loans from their organisation, but their frequency of pay changing. So, in essence, we see quite a fragmented and disjointed employee life cycle with multiple systems really restricting the way that organisations go about innovation and innovating this space. And that goes back to what we said sort of before, is there's a real challenge there when multiple systems are at play, and things are done in sort of very closed way for a lot of organizations. So really opening that up and really thinking quite strategically really allows for the future of an organization, the well-being of its people, to be managed much more effectively.
I think when I look at the potential here, it's also, we've done good work in optimizing maybe our ERP systems and our CRM systems. We've put good data analytics across those operational elements, and yet one of the most powerful assets we have in organizations to make a difference, whether it's grow, improve service, be more effective, is our people. And yet we don't seem to be applying those elements of modern elements of thinking, or haven't been able to. I think technology has been an inhibitor here in the past to actually solving those issues. The fourth mistake then logically leads on to really underestimating the impact payroll and HR analytics and insights can actually have on business performance. We've all seen this where we've done this within, again, ERP and supply chain processes or CRM processes, bringing good dashboarding to the business leaders, to the managers, to the actual organization, the people themselves, really changes behavior. It gives them focus. It gives them the elements to kind of note that these things are cared about and are valued. Yet from an HR and payroll perspective, this data is still somewhat siloed or put back to very flat operational, maybe monthly reporting, and largely due to the pain of pulling that together or just that traditional thinking again. And this is one of the most powerful things, again, if you're thinking of what could influence growth, what can influence the culture and elements of the business success. These are key things that can actually help bring that focus.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, we deal with lots of, dare I say, HR payroll purists that are very much around the process and the effectiveness of that. But sometimes a clearer way of starting is, what analytics, what information do you really need as an organisation, which does challenge some of that status quo. But again, going back to some of the research, doing some of these things and doing them better and provide a lot more data to managers, employees, executives, whether it's a sense of belonging or whether it's a great place to work, whether it's retaining people, whether it be, again, achievement of targets, the ability to adapt. And I mean, we were sort of quite shocked as we read through, the ability to innovate and change depending on, obviously, to a large part, how engaged people are. And of course, that all makes logical sense. More information allows you to make better decisions. But again, as you can see by the bottom box, not very many organisations have embarked on that journey. And I guess that's in part why we wanted to run this webinar, to really highlight that we think that there's an important opportunity here for organisations to really embark on this journey.
Absolutely. The fifth mistake is this. We see this very, very often as well, is thinking it's normal to buy standalone solutions to plug in and plug the gaps in any HR payroll workloads. And it's fascinating to look at. When we look at sort of ERP and finance systems, it's quite common now to have good architectures either have a consolidated system across your financial and customer systems, or have them at least very well integrated, and then having good analytics sitting across those, be it Power BI or any other reporting tools that you put across that. And those have become fundamental now to how we run the operations of the business in terms of sales forecasting. You wind back 10, 15 years ago, CRM was this new thing, and we all used to manage sales without it. Now take that away, and we'll actually be left in the blind when it comes to forecasting, etc. And really, then when you flick across to people being the big asset of most organizations, it looks like that. It's very fragmented. It's very disjointed. There's maybe limited or very little integration across those workloads in terms of the structure of the team, the data, and how the business can consume that information. Because it's one thing to have the team efficient, and that's thinking quite siloed in just the team. But there's another thing about the business being able to actively consume and engage in that data. And that's all born from, the fractured structure between potentially payroll and HR teams being somewhat separated, and therefore looking to solve their own workloads and independently from each other. That perception that maybe not one tool can do everything that's needed. The whole multiple systems, the spreadsheets to kind of handle the data, but then you've got the management, the accuracy, the double handling of that, which kind of adds to workloads, which adds to resource and costs of the teams, which limits the value they can actually bring to the business from that, because they're too busy managing the transactions and keeping the data up to date. That inability to really consolidate that information, or it requires a lot of manipulation to align it to actually give insights, means in most cases organizations don't get the insights. And then, of course, the aging systems, actually restrict innovation. So as Chris said, people potentially have payroll systems that have been running for 10, 12, 15 years, and they're just getting the job done. But we actually need a lot more from that. And then, there's hidden costs or risks too, in terms of data and cybersecurity becoming a much more relevant topic now. And I guess the point go, Chris.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say too, multiple systems, they're all born from different identities. They all look different. Aligning data is very, very challenging. So whilst the concept of buying and plugging in, different tools to solve problems, we're seeing that that's created a huge disjoint for many sort of medium, large organisation. And again, if you take it back to sort of core user experience, whilst you can provide a sort of seamless login, you don't have to enter a password to get to something, everything looks different, everything operates differently, everything is, focused on its one particular, area. And we see that that has created a huge disjoint in the space.
Yeah. And I guess I just sum it up by, we're very comfortable accepting that, having consolidated finance, operations, sales, customer systems, all integrated, connected with good reporting is what we should have as a good business. And there's now this, I feel, a realization that we actually have to have the same when it comes to people, and the accessibility of that data to our managers.
Yeah, so I guess, where does that take you for the future? And that is actually looking at the entire life cycle of the business. How does things like AI and systems actually, being part of the culture, or technology being part of the culture of the organization, suggesting to a person, if they want to advance, or there's an opportunity to advance here, this is what they need to do to improve. There's obviously everything from attracting the right talent, socializing them, onboarding them, aligning, engaging, measuring, evaluating, developing. I guess it goes without saying that well-being and remuneration or pay is key. But we see now organizations going, well, how do we approach that entire life cycle, and how do we do it better? And how do we think much more strategically, albeit that you don't necessarily do everything in one go. So we're seeing, a definite shift to, what is the entire sort of, call it service line, what is the entire experience, and that then coupled with, really developing people to be better, do better jobs, aligned to the aspirations of the business, and make sure that their own aspirations, align. And if they don't, well, what are organisations going to do? It's become, quite a key sort of piece of how an organisation thinks about its future. So yeah, trends, what's changing? I guess that awareness, certainly things like the Holidays Act and compliance has put a lot more onus on organisations and software vendors. We're seeing obviously a lot more move away from, things being done sort of in the corner of an office. We're seeing a lot more valuing system consolidation versus, multiple solutions. We're obviously seeing a heightened security risk. I guess that goes without saying. Employee engagement, well-being, I guess that also goes without saying. And again, we're seeing, organisations look at their procurement of how they go about these things in a different way as well. So, a move to real-time, analytics, a lot more information, moving away from that sort of transactional view, taking a one canvas approach. What is the life cycle of people through our business? Looking at how technology really assists with that, and making sure then that, for the future, you've got technology that can, really assist with the changes and the growth of organisations, has become then that real innovative push that we're seeing.
Mm.
So yeah, I guess where do you start? Without sort of being too sort of pointed. I mean, I think you probably, everyone on the webinar, you get to see that, whilst you can take well, it's not fixed. It's not broken, don't fix it type of approach. What we're seeing now, very similar to, as Sven said a couple of times, around ERP and CRM, we're seeing a real evolution of the space. So, I guess it's for most organisations now is really understanding how serious they may be, or you may be, around, that future. Learning the capabilities of some of the more modern technologies. I mean, so many payroll HR systems and products were designed, even before the iPhone came about. And that obviously leads to whilst it can provide some pragmatic benefits, the realities are it hasn't really moved. The industry hasn't really moved with the time in a lot of areas. So again, I guess we think that actually, whilst it goes without or goes against the grain of risk, we believe that starting with an area like payroll, the framework, how you can save money and time around that, equip your business with a lot more basic insights, can be quite a key piece to build from. And again, then expanding progressively out on that journey, but arguably having that journey somewhat mapped out. So we believe that that is a very key way of going about this versus, again, coming to market for, one product to solve one problem.
Which actually makes the problem worse in the long run by limiting it. Yeah, I think it is putting that. Oh, sorry, Chris. You got one more.
Oh no, you go. You go. Yeah.
No, I was just saying it's putting that. It's putting that mindset on to go. We have a potential to influence every single person in the business to versus, or you can just change the small core operating team, and they're quite different in thinking and quite different in value. And we're seeing projects that are achieving the ladder of influencing the business through coming back and challenging traditional thinking. Hence, we say payroll is a good place to start because it will challenge the fundamental parts of the foundations of a lot of things are built off.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, you're welcome to email. We can give you again the Josh Burson information. I won't read through each of those points again, but it's quite strategic. It really helps sort of broaden thinking. It's a fairly easy read, and it's something that you can really put your head around actually understanding, a clear sort of business case for doing things better. So if you want that report, we can share it with you.
So in summary, just there's a few questions that have come in which we'll cover off next, but feel free to add your question in while I just recap them. In some of those 5 areas, so the first is just seeing HR and Payroll as transactional and operational. And I know the teams have got a lot of desire to be strategic in the organization, and there's some just real roadblocks that stop that, be it the legacy thinking of execs around the roles of the teams, and that's not being able to provide those insights. But then the minute you get those insights, you go, oh, I can't believe I haven't had this. This would be significant. So there's a change element there. Rethinking that whole risk of payroll and seeing it as high to stick with what you know. And a lot of times I'm talking to people and they go, well, we don't really know, it's just worked, this is the way we've done that. But then to Chris's point, one of the most extreme projects we've had is that they actually were overpaying by a significant amount. And it's not uncommon to find those types of things when you're doing payroll projects, that things are wrong. Accepting the old traditional processes and procedures as best practice. It's funny how I just find it's interesting how in our exec roles we've really evolved our thinking when it comes to ERP and automation and AI and machine learning and analytics in all the other areas of the systems except the most important part of our business, which is people. And that shift has happened, even personally for me over the last 6 months around how we can really influence things by learning what's actually possible. And then, of course, estimating that impact. Most organizations put people who have come up through the role with really deep skills and experience into leadership or management roles to bring other people through and manage areas. And so that's good. They have the skills, they have the capability to do the work well, and they've had those years of experience, but they may not have all of the people experience. And so we kind of have HR to help with that, but we don't have the analytics to help keep their mind focused on the right things or to observe things that will actually drive behavior. And then the last is just thinking it's normal to keep bolting on different parts of things, and any CIO will know that that's a strategy that just leads to more complication down the road and potentially limited value. Whilst it fixes a workload problem, it doesn't really enable the entire business. So it's thinking, oh, I can fix my team's problem, but am I fixing the organization or adding value to the whole organization? A team of 5 versus a business of 500 or 2,000 employees. How do I affect that? All right. So thanks for hearing us out on those, and I'll run into the Q&A. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the questions that come through, and feel free to keep firing them through. We'll cover as many as we can in the next couple of minutes. So Chris, the first one, probably a good one for you. Couldn't you just use Power BI across existing systems to provide analytics?
Yeah, Technically, yes. I guess experience shows differently. Many different solutions, many different systems, many different architectures. Many products don't necessarily come with the same abilities to integrate and share information. And so what we find is that you end up with you'll get some information, but you won't actually solve the problem. That's been our experience. So whilst there's, again, it's, I guess, a lot of technology, should solve a problem. When you get down to the detail, you find that really, really challenging. And it's not to say it's not absolutely achievable, but it comes at a potential huge cost, and isn't necessarily the efficient way of doing it.
I'd add to that as well that it doesn't solve some core issues around maybe duplicate information or legacy processes that you're doing, and it keeps your team busy.
Systems cross over hugely, and people, organisations, people don't seem to sometimes understand that. So yeah.
And probably look, that's also aligning all that data in an automated fashion to provide analytics means you're building that all from scratch when there are actually solutions, modern payroll and HR tools that actually solve these problems off the bat. And then I find it interesting. These projects don't tend to be expensive, especially when you compare it to the likes of doing ERPs or CRM implementations. So I would say there's a cost. The cost of actually doing that would outweigh the benefit of actually changing to something that supports the strategy. Anyway, payroll data is sensitive. How do you ensure people only see what they need to see? Especially when you're talking about, I assume that's when we're talking about organizational-wide analytics.
Yeah. That just comes down to good quality security models and frameworks. But again, if organisations have been thinking more broadly around roles, structures, different information, different detail can be provided. Most pieces of technology will have quite relatively strong controls there, especially when it comes to salary information. So again, that's controlled through security.
Cool. I can probably answer this one. What are the common things you find when changing payroll projects? It's interesting. Legacy configurations definitely comes up in that there's been years and years and years and years things have been configured, people have been put on entitlements. The fact that the payroll systems traditionally don't give you good insights into easily seeing that information unless you're really digging for every type of piece, you'll find there'll be potentially people on entitlements that have long expired or they've moved roles, but the entitlements haven't been sunset. You will find missing data, which is causing calculations to be done incorrectly. You may find that if you're running on multiple geographic, sometimes people are running one payroll across two, Australia and New Zealand, for example, with the nuances and how leaves are calculated or things like that, that could be that could cause errors. So it's a multitude of things, and it's probably it's that misalignment of something that was implemented 12 years ago and what the business is today, and it causes those. The interesting thing with any payroll project is you will always have differences, but you explain them and you correct them and you understand what they were, so you have a very good transparent view of what was right and wrong before. Cool. Couple more.
There's a point there that the sun's right behind your head. Yeah.
Sorry,
I was going to say it earlier, but that's right.
It was raining before. Do you have any recommendations on good HR systems and tools to create good dashboards? That's not a question.
Yeah, that's probably something we can email you a suggestion of things. If you want to provide email address, we can.
Chris leads the development of Gemini Enterprise HR and Payroll, which is actually a modernly built payroll. Fusion 5 has a number of payroll tools that we own and have been in the market for 15, 20 years. And so happy to share with you on what we're doing in that space, because it's kind of born out of real challenge and trying to drive organizations forward. Thanks. Sorry about the sun in the background, but thank you so much for your time today. If there are any other questions, Chris's email is available, myself, and I know Angela will be following up too and is able to provide access to that HR predictions white paper, etc. So yeah. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for the time. Thanks for taking the time out.
Thank you. Cheers.